The stifling afternoon heat in the city seemed to melt the asphalt under the feet of passers-by. The air was heavy, saturated with the smell of exhaust fumes and the dust that kicked up with every step. The incessant noise of cars, horns, and voices mixed into an urban cacophony, a chaotic symphony of hurried lives, daily routines, where each individual seemed absorbed in their own existence. There was no room for contemplation, nor for pause. People rushed into glass and concrete buildings, avoiding each other's gaze, focused on their phones or their thoughts, walking as if the city belonged to them, as if the whole world was there to serve them. And yet, amidst this turmoil, a distinctive presence stood out. It was him. Muhammad Ali. His steps were slow, almost measured, as if each movement was calculated, carrying meaning. He walked alone, an imposing figure who, despite the bustle of the city, seemed motionless in his own space. His gaze, that of a man who had seen and experienced more than many others, captured the sunlight, shining with an inner wisdom, a quiet strength. He was like a mountain in the middle of the city ocean, steady and indifferent to the waves of the crowds passing around him. Ali was in no hurry. He carried within him something heavier than the simple existence of a boxer, of a legendary athlete. He bore responsibility for the dreams of a people, for the silent and noisy struggles of those who fought for their dignity, their freedom, their equality. His approach, determined but calm, reminded everyone that his presence, even in a city as anonymous as this, was not accidental. He had just left a meeting with a group of civil rights activists, where he had spoken, as he often did, with the same ardor he put into his fights. His words were precise blows, hitting where it hurt. He spoke of a world where skin color would no longer be an obstacle, where human value would be judged by the greatness of the soul and not by racial or social criteria. He knew that this dream seemed distant, that injustice was a monster with many heads, but he also knew that a more just world would not be born from passivity. It took more than courage for him to stand on the stage and denounce the reality of discrimination, hatred, and inequality. He was Muhammad Ali, the world champion, but above all, a man who believed his fame had a greater mission than sporting glory. As he walked through a dark alley, an inconspicuous path among the imposing buildings, a strange feeling crossed his mind. He turned his head slightly, feeling the presence of a figure behind him. A chill passed through the air, a palpable tension created around him, although his steps never slowed. He heard footsteps behind him. A heavy noise, a cadence that was getting closer. Ali knew exactly who was there before he even turned his head. A policeman. One of those men of the order who believed that their uniform gave them power over others, a power that the law gave them, and which they used as they pleased to impose their vision of the world. The policeman, tall and portly, moved forward with a determined step, his light blue uniform contrasting with the gray of the alley. He wasn't just a peace officer. He carried on his shoulders years of ingrained prejudice, distrust and hatred towards those he considered other. This police officer, upon seeing the black icon that Ali was, had already made a quick and erroneous assessment. In his eyes, this was not a man who had turned the world upside down with his fists and his words. No, in his eyes, Ali was just a guy like him. A black man who should belong at the bottom of the social hierarchy. The policeman approached, his boots hitting the ground with an echo that sounded like a warning. He was sure of his power, sure of his superiority. The feeling of domination made him blind to the dignity of the man before him. "Do you think you can afford anything?" he said in a condescending tone, his voice full of contempt. "That a guy like you can walk freely in my town?" Ali, calm and serene, slowly turned his gaze towards the man, his eyes piercing the policeman's soul like a penetrating light. There was no fear in that look, only a deep tranquility that seemed to defy violence and injustice. His eyes, shining with wisdom, reflected all the wisdom acquired through years of struggles and sacrifices, victories and defeats. The warmth of the afternoon sun seemed to concentrate around him, as if the entire universe was holding its breath waiting for his words. "I'm not here to bother you," he said slowly, each word weighed, imbued with the quiet strength of a man who knew what it was to stand up in the face of hatred. "I'm here to live, just like you, and I'm not going to apologize for that." He did not raise his voice. nor did he try to convince with shouts or fiery gestures. His words were simple, but they carried a truth that no violence, no hatred could erase. They were the testimony of the experience of a man who had been overwhelmed by trials, but who had remained upright, true to himself, to his ideal of justice and dignity. The policeman, for his part, did not understand. His eyes were blurred with rage, with the years of prejudice that had permeated every fiber of his being. Ollie was for him the embodiment of everything he despised, everything he thought deserved brutality. He didn't listen to the words, didn't see the humanity of the man in front of him. He didn't want to understand. In a fit of anger, blinded by the rage of his own prejudices and the silent defiance of Ollie, he suddenly raised his baton. He brought it down violently on the boxer's chest, hoping that this blow would destroy his calm, that it would break his resistance. The impact of metal against Ali's body rang through the air like a clap of thunder, but against all expectations, Ollie did not move an inch. He remained there, motionless, solid as a mountain, an imposing and serene presence in the midst of the storm that raged around him. He had no visible reaction, no cry, no movement, as if he were impervious to the violence of the world around him. The police officer, although surprised by the total lack of immediate reaction, did not stop. His rage grew, fueled by anger, and he tried to strike again. This time he aimed at Ali's face, as if he thought that might finally make him give in, make him react, defend himself. But once again, he was very wrong. Ollie, with the grace of a martial arts master, dodged the blow. But instead of just dodging the attack, he did something much more impactful. In a fluid, measured movement, but of unstoppable efficiency, Ollie grabbed the policeman's arm before the baton even reached him. His fingers, firm but controlled, grabbed the stick with disconcerting precision, stopping the attack in its tracks. The police officer, surprised, felt pressure exerted on his arm, but contrary to everything he had imagined, Ollie did not return the violence. He was offering him a lesson. Ollie's gaze did not leave the policeman's. His eyes were hard, but full of understanding, like those of a man who had seen more than just physical conflict. He didn't need to shout or threaten. Its silence was unfathomably deep, like an ocean whose surface seemed calm, but whose depth hid secrets that few could understand. "Do you think this baton gives you power?" Ollie said, his voice deep, calm but full of truth. Every word seemed to sink deep into the officer's mind. "Do you think that hitting someone because they are different, or because they are defending their dignity, is what makes you a man?" The policeman, caught in the tension of the moment, tried to free himself, to force his hand to move, but he was like a man caught in a trap whose rules he did not understand. Ollie, with disconcerting ease, maintained his grip, and his gaze did not turn away. It was as if the boxer was holding not only his arm, but also this man's soul, preventing him from fleeing, from hiding from the truth he didn't want to see. "I could break you into 1,000 pieces, but I'm not going to do that," Ollie continued, his voice not losing its strength, but deepening further.
"You know why?
Because that's what you expect.
You want me to fall into your hatred, to stoop to your level."
He paused, each second becoming heavier, more meaningful. "But I'm bigger than that. And so are you, if you agree to understand." He slowly released the policeman's arm, each movement marked by calm, but also inner power. The air around them seemed to thicken, as if the entire world was holding its breath. The policeman, destabilized by Ali's quiet firmness, took a step back, his gaze shifting, like a man who realizes that he has just ventured too far into territory that he does not understand. The weight of Ali's words resonated deeper in his mind than any blow from a baton. These words, simple but loaded with a truth that struck straight to the heart, had become invisible weapons, far more powerful than anything he could have imagined. "What you just did has nothing to do with justice," Ollie continued, his voice deep, like a calm but powerful river. "It's fear.
You're afraid of what you stand for. You're afraid of my carry, my voice, and my conviction."
Each word seemed to embed itself in the policeman's mind like a delicate but irrefutable needle. "But know this, you can never break what you do not have the power to understand." Ali's words were like a shockwave, shooting straight into the officer's heart. The latter, who believed he had authority and control over the situation, suddenly found himself confronted with a reality that he had never envisaged. Ollie, with implacable tranquility, had blown away all his bearings. It was not about brute force or domination. It was not the violence that made him retreat, but the irresistible weight of a truth he could not ignore. The man he had deemed inferior, whom he had sought to dominate, had just made him face his own fragility. Slowly, almost in spite of himself, the policeman lowered his eyes. He felt a mixture of shame and confusion, an emotion he hadn't anticipated. He was overcome with remorse, as if Ollie had just inflicted an invisible blow on him, but much deeper than anything he had experienced up to that moment. He was no longer just a police officer, a man in uniform seeking to impose his will. He was a naked man, confronted with his own faults, his own weakness. He had become a spectator of his own inhumanity. Ollie, in all his greatness, had reduced this man to his simplest truth. He did not understand. He did not understand the courage he faced, the strength of a free spirit, or even the human dignity that stood before him. The police officer had acted out of fear, and it was this fear that led him to violence. But he had just discovered that true strength does not lie in the power we exercise over others, but in self-control, in the ability to understand and question oneself. It's not too late to change, Ollie concludes, his voice infused with quiet but determined wisdom. These words, bearers of hope and possibility, touched the officer more deeply than any anger or humiliation he had hoped to arouse. But it starts with an honest look in the mirror. Ollie had given the man a chance, not to accept his guilt, but to find some form of redemption by confronting his own demons. He had not sought to humiliate him, to punish him, but to open a door to a path he had never considered, that of change, of self-awareness. Ollie turned on his heel and turned away, without a backward glance, like a man who knew exactly where he was going. He didn't need to look back to know his message had been heard. He was free. Not only free from physical chains, but also from the invisible chains that others, throughout his life, had sought to impose on him. With every step he took, he moved not only toward his own freedom, but toward a world where dignity, respect, and understanding could still triumph. He walked away from the scene, leaving behind a police officer who, although still frozen in the moment, had just experienced a confrontation far more intense than that in the street. This encounter would not simply be a memory, but a lesson that would deeply mark the man. Ollie knew that true victories were measured not in physical strength or battles won, but in how you affect the lives of others, in the quiet changes you can bring about simply by staying true to yourself. And as Ollie continued on his way, he carried with him the certainty that his presence, discreet as it was, had planted a seed in this man's mind. A seed that, with time, might perhaps grow and blossom into something greater. He had left a lesson in the air, a truth that would resonate long after his departure, in minds and hearts. A lesson that would not fade with time, but would continue to burst through the walls of ignorance and intolerance.